Greetings and welcome to another episode of RedWatch TV. Today, we're going to be getting a lesson in how to run a Russian-style managed democracy. Here, the entire democratic process can be best thought of as a vast theatrical performance, where the lead protagonists who dominate the stage have been carefully chosen by a shadowy elite of power brokers. Their victory is beyond doubt. Oppositional figures function as a supporting cast. Their role is to provide credibility to the illusion of a fair competitive system, where the outcomes of elections are unknown. The electorate are merely spectators to the whole performance, looking on from the outside while the carefully choreographed spectacle plays out for them on stage. It has all the sights and sounds one would expect to see in a democratic election in the West. There are television adverts, media interviews, rallies, and conventions. But unlike the West, everything here is done purely for show. Genuine opposition figures are treated like enemies of the state. They're marginalized, criminalized, and sometimes murdered for their refusal to join in the performance. In this episode, we're going to be exploring some of the characters involved, the roles they play in the theatre of Russian democracy. The lead role in the show is, of course, Vladimir Putin himself, and the party that provided him with the platform for his presidency, United Russia. United Russia is the largest party in the Russian parliament, known as the Duma, winning a strong majority in the recent 2021 elections, with 324 of the 450 seats available going to the party. The United Russia Party was founded on December 1st, 2001, through a merger of the Unity Party and the Fatherland All Russia Party. This was a crucial period in Russian politics, with the nation still discovering its post-Soviet identity and restructuring its political system. At the core of United Russia's formation was the desire to consolidate various political factions around common goals and values, thereby strengthening the stability and the cohesion of Russian governance. The party's guiding principles emphasized national unity, social conservatism, and strong centralized governance. The early years of United Russia saw a strategic alliance with then-President Vladimir Putin. His popularity and political vision played an instrumental role in shaping the party's direction. The collaboration between Putin and United Russia would become the defining characteristic of Russian politics in the decades that followed. In the 2003 parliamentary elections, United Russia secured a majority in the State Duma, the lower house of the Federal Assembly of Russia. This marked a turning point, establishing the party's dominance in Russian politics. The election victory solidified United Russia's position as the leading political force, laying the groundwork for the implementation of policies that resonated with Vladimir Putin's vision for Russia. United Russia's commitment to economic stability, welfare, and strong national defense attracted significant public support. The party's ideology and alignment with Putin's administration allowed it to forge connections with various social, political, and business entities across Russia. However, the party's dominance and close ties with the Kremlin also led to criticisms and allegations of authoritarian tendencies. The concentration of power in the hands of United Russia raised questions about the health and diversity of the Russian political scene. Vladimir Putin's rise to power in 1999 as Prime Minister and subsequently as President in 2000 marked a significant shift in Russian politics. The nation was emerging from a tumultuous post-Soviet period, filled with economic upheaval and political instability. Putin's promise of strong leadership, economic revival, and national pride resonated with many Russians, and his influence began to permeate the political system. The formation of United Russia in 2001 provided a political platform that aligned with Putin's vision. While Putin himself was not a formal member of the party, his association with it was clear. The principles of national unity, strong central governance, and social conservatism embodied in United Russia's manifesto reflected Putin's own political ideology. During Putin's presidency, United Russia became the neo-Soviet embodiment of the new ruling establishment, enjoying the support and resources of the state machinery. This close connection led to increased scrutiny and allegations of favoritism and authoritarianism. However, this alignment has not been without significant controversy. Allegations of electoral fraud, manipulation and political repression have been levelled against United Russia, leading to domestic and international condemnation. The party's dominance, combined with a lack of political pluralism, has raised serious questions about the integrity and fairness of the Russian political system. One of the most serious allegations facing United Russia pertains to electoral fraud. In the municipal elections held in St. Petersburg on March 2009, United Russia won 77.3% of the vote. However, Anton Chumachenko, a member of the party, openly admitted that the results were frankly rigged in his district. Similar accusations of manipulation have been recurrent throughout various elections, including the elections for the head of the city of Vologda in 2008, where opposition candidates were removed under questionable charges. In Murmansk, police detained individuals distributing vodka in exchange for votes in favour of United Russia candidate Mikhail Savchenko on March 2009. One of the detainees even claimed to have received 600,000 rubles to organise this bribery, shining a spotlight on the corrupt practices within the party. This was orchestrated under the instructions of the chairman of the Regional Electoral Commission, Yelman Yusupov, leading to significant advantage for the United Russia candidate, Mayor Nikolai Nikolaichuk. Tomsk Governor Viktor Kres's open pressure on voters and slander against opposition candidates further tainted the process. Instances of voter manipulation were widespread. Discrepancies in voting percentages have been recorded in other places as well. The Duma elections of 2007 saw unprecedented irregularities, with United Russia receiving up to 109% of the votes in some areas. Students were forced to vote under threat of failing exams, and there were cases of massive ballot stuffing. Similarly, in the 2008 presidential elections, there were instances of bribery, multiple voting by individuals, and issuing already filled out ballots to voters. More recently, in the 2021 elections, the ruling United Russia Party secured another landslide win in a vote that has been dubbed the most repressive since Soviet times. With some 85% of the ballots counted, United Russia, which backs Russian President Vladimir Putin, had won 50% of the vote, appearing to lose some seats in parliament, but paving the way for it to retain its majority. 3 days of voting, an extended period the authorities claim is meant to prevent the spread of disease, but critics argue facilitates vote rigging and brought with it a litany of violations. In Moscow, results from electronic voting had not been made public after 12 hours, a delay that critics claim was a sign of tampering. As in previous elections, footage shared on social media showed a brazen ballot stuffing and harassment of observers. At least one new tactic also surfaced, the use of pens with disappearing ink, presumably in order to correct ballots after they had been cast. Another first was voters being bussed in from the so-called Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics, two regions in eastern Ukraine under the control of Moscow-backed separatists. According to independent media, some voters were issued their Russian passports right as they waited their turn to vote. And for the first time since the Soviet Union's collapse, election monitors from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe were absent after the Russian authorities capped the number of observers allowed to attend. It was the culmination of months of machinations by the Russian authorities that left some Russians and media outlets refusing to use the term election altogether. This was a carnival, Kremlin advisor turned critic, political analyst Gleb Pavlovsky told the TV Drozh television channel. In the months preceding the vote, Russian authorities used every trick in the book to keep opponents off the ballot and crush Kremlin critics. Critics argue that these practices reflect a systemic undermining of democratic principles, leading to a loss of faith in the electoral process. These controversies have led to domestic protests and international condemnation. Even within the party, voices of dissent have emerged, as reflected in Chumachenko's open letter criticising the party's methods. The negative perception of United Russia extends to its association with the abuse of administrative resources. The culmination of these allegations paints a picture of a party embroiled in scandal, corruption and manipulation. It raises questions about the legitimacy of its political victory and casts a shadow over the integrity of the entire Russian political system. However, despite the United Russia Party's total advantage when it comes to control over the state machinery, The political theatre of Russian politics would be incomplete without some oppositional parties to create the illusion of choice and the idea that there are alternatives to the current ruling establishment. There's no more famous party in the fake opposition than the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, the KPRF. They hold a prominent place in Russia's political history, echoing the ideologies and principles that once governed the Soviet era. Its historical roots are deeply entwined with the evolution of communism in Russia, a journey marked by triumphs, trials, and turbulent transformations. Formed in 1993 as the successor to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the KPRF carries the legacy of Marxist-Lenin thought, coupled with the blood-curdling crimes of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. Its ideologies resonate with many Russians nostalgic for the Soviet era, which has helped the party retain significant influence over the years. The early years of the KPRF were marked by a staunch adherence to Soviet principles, with a strong emphasis on state control over resources, economic equality, and an anti-Western stance. However, as Russia's political landscape shifted with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the KPRF found itself adapting to new realities. The party's leadership, particularly under Gennady Zyuganov, who has led the party since its inception, sought to find a balance between retaining traditional communist principles and responding to the modern political dynamics of Russia. Zyuganov's role was instrumental in shaping the party's political stance, emphasizing nationalism and adopting a critical view of Western liberal democracy. Yet the KPRF's journey has not been without challenges. In the 1990s, it struggled to assert itself as a viable opposition to Boris Yeltsin's administration, grappling with internal divisions and a rapidly changing political climate. The recent elections held in September 2021 signalled a resurgence for the party. The Communist Party won the precinct of Moscow polling station number 151, setting up on the premises of the State Gulag History Museum, with nearly 29% of the vote, followed by 20% for the ruling party of Russia. This result was indicative of a surprising surge in strength, with the KPRF set to gain 15 seats in the new State Duma. Preliminary official results showed them polling close to 19%, an impressive comeback from their dismal results of 2016. The KPRF's history is emblematic of Russia's complex and evolving politics. While it has managed to maintain a significant presence, it has also navigated the delicate balance between aligning itself with the Kremlin's goals and maintaining its own unique identity. What remains consistent is the party's historical attachment to the Soviet principles, even as it contends with modern political dynamics. This historical legacy is not without its ironies. The party's victory in a precinct located so close to the testimony of Stalin's crimes reflects the paradoxes that continue to shape the KPRF's identity and influence in Russian politics. The future of the KPRF remains uncertain, yet its historical roots continue to define its place in Russia's political fabric. As the party fared well in regions like the Far East, the Urals, and the Mid-Volga in recent elections, it reflects an ongoing resurgence with voters. Its ability to balance its Soviet legacy with contemporary political challenges will continue to shape its role as an influential opposition in Russia. Under the leadership of Gennady Zyuganov, the KPRF has adapted to the changing Russian political scene with a nurtured nationalistic rhetoric. It vehemently criticizes Western influences, often portraying them as a threat to Russian sovereignty and cultural identity. The party's anti-Western stance is intertwined with a nostalgia for the Soviet era, appealing to a segment of the Russian population dissatisfied with the current state of affairs. Yet the role of the KPRF in Russia's opposition is multifaceted and at times contradictory. While it positions itself as a significant force against the ruling United Russia Party, it's also been described as part of the so-called systemic opposition. The KPRF's relationship with the Kremlin has thus been viewed with skepticism, particularly by more liberal-minded reformers. The party's controversies extend beyond the electoral sphere. Leaders of the KPRF regularly march to place red carnations on Stalin's grave, a symbolic gesture that has drawn criticism and reflects an ongoing struggle to reconcile its Soviet legacy with modern political sensibilities. The KPRF's political stance and role in Russia's opposition are emblematic of broader tensions within Russian politics. It strives to maintain its commitment to socialist principles while navigating the complex realities of power, influence and opposition. Its recent electoral successes reflect both its enduring appeal and contradictions that continue to define its position in Russia's political landscape. The KPRF's controversies are numerous, reflecting both its historical legacy and contemporary political manoeuvring. The party's alignment with Joseph Stalin's ideologies, its leaders' regular tributes at Stalin's grave, and its unwavering commitment to communist principles have ignited intense debates. This adherence to Soviet-era ideology poses a complex challenge, especially in a nation where memories of the Gulag and the authoritarian rule are still raw and painful. Furthermore, the party's relationship with the ruling United Russia and the Kremlin raises serious questions about its authenticity as an opposition force. Despite being vocal critics of the government's policies, there have been instances where the KPRF has shown complacency and reluctance to challenge the Kremlin aggressively. This perceived duality has led to accusations of the party being part of the systemic opposition, contributing to skepticism about the party's intentions and credibility. The KPRF's future is fraught with uncertainties and contradictions. Its revival in recent elections shows that it still resonates with sections of a Russian society. However, its complex relationship with the ruling powers, its ideological rigidity, and the challenges posed by a new generation. No exploration of the Russian fake opposition would be complete without looking at Russia's so-called Liberal Democratic Party. With a long history as an opposition movement dating back to Soviet times, the Liberal Democrats have been a long feature of the Russian political scene. Despite having a name that implies a moderate Western outlook, the political stance of the Liberal Democrats couldn't be further removed from its namesakes in the West. Ideologically, the Russian Liberal Democrats are a blend of centralized authoritarianism with extreme ultranationalist patriotism that makes their name all the more ironic. The history of the Russian Liberal Democratic Party is heavily intertwined with that of its famous leader, Vladimir Zhirinovsky. Zhirinovsky has gained international notoriety down the years for his extreme xenophobic and racist rhetoric, as well as his open advocacy for violent expansionist foreign policy. The party's emergence was not a mere coincidence. It was a carefully orchestrated political play. Some experts have posited that the Soviet leadership played a role in its creation to draw votes away from the reformists. The Liberal Democrats were seen as an alternative voice in the political spectrum, merging ultranationalism with a strongman persona epitomized by Zhirinovsky himself. The Liberal Democrats' stance on key issues is a fusion of contradictions. While opposing both neoliberal capitalism and Soviet-style communism, it have advocated for a strong centralized Russia, one that would regain its former glory. Its domestic policies were laced with populist undertones, promising to fight for the common people while railing against the elites. As the Liberal Democrats cemented its place in Russian politics, it began to shape the political discourse. Its ultranationalist views found resonance in segments of the population who felt alienated by the rapid transition of the 1990s. This allowed the party to maintain a steady presence in the political arena, influencing policies and the national conversation. The Liberal Democrats' influence is not confined to the party's political stance, but extends to the way it shapes the political dialogue in Russia. Its ultranationalist rhetoric, once considered extreme, has now become mainstream political discourse. This normalization of hardline stances has contributed to a more hostile international outlook and a growing skepticism towards the West, especially from the Russian populace. In recent years, the Liberal Democrats' role in Russian politics has been both theatrical and instrumental. On the one hand, the party's leaders, particularly the charismatic Vladimir Zhirinovsky, have maintained their reputation for bombastic speeches and fiery debates. On the other hand, they played a crucial role in legitimizing the political process. Once dubbed the clown prince of Russian politics, Vladimir Zhirinovsky is well known for his flamboyant rhetoric and often outrageous statements. Often referred to as Russia's Trump, he appealed to the disenfranchised, those who felt left behind by the rapid changes in post-Soviet Russia. By weaving a narrative that combined nostalgia for a lost empire with anger towards perceived enemies, both internal and external, Zhirinovsky has been able to create a loyal following. An ultra-nationalist, Zhirinovsky has advocated for Russia to take back the former Soviet republics it lost with the dissolution of the USSR, threatening to wipe out Poland, and once argued that the Baltic states should be flooded with nuclear waste. But his views have become increasingly mainstream as Vladimir Putin moved further to the right in rhetoric and actions. In 2012, Zhirinovsky made headlines by releasing a surreal political video where he sat on a sleigh, relentlessly whipping a donkey, which is meant to be a metaphor for Russian society. Not known for his subtle political messaging, the advert ended with the message, "Zhirinovsky, all will be better." This is in contrast to another of his political slogans, "Vote Zhirinovsky or things will get worse." Zhirinovsky's penchant for attractive ladies is well known. In a move that would scarcely be imaginable in the liberal democracies of the West, the leader of Russia's third largest political parties held court at Moscow's strip clubs. He's been seen there taking time out of his packed legislative agenda to launch his own music CD at the Dolls Gentlemen's Club in Moscow. Canadian writer Jennifer Gould, who conducted an interview with Zhirinovsky for Playboy, was a little more direct in her characterization. Until meeting Zhirinovsky, Gould wrote that she had never been subjected to such blatant sexual harassment, and this was in the 1990s. Amongst other things, Zhirinovsky asked her to undress right now and praised orgies, which he claimed would do a lot for world peace. As Gould noted, Zhirinovsky had a history of such antics. On another occasion, he greeted an Italian interviewer in the style of a Roman emperor. He was in bed, naked under a blanket, with his hands beneath his head and his bare feet sticking out. A young bodyguard sat behind him. Zhirinovsky's fiery wrath was often directed against the United States. He once said, "At night, our scientists will slightly change the gravitational field of the Earth, and your country will be underwater," although it was noted that he appeared to be visibly intoxicated at the time. He also said he wants to forcibly take back Alaska, because in his view, it'll be a great place to keep Ukrainians. In Zhirinovsky's dream world, all of the former Soviet countries will get back together. The ethnic minorities will murder each other, Russians will rule. Georgians will serve as slaves, and the Baltic states will be used for the dumping of nuclear waste. Oh, and they need to seize Afghanistan and the Middle East so that Russians will have somewhere warm to go on vacation. He openly advocated for dictatorship and suggested that Putin should run the country until death. "I have clean hands," he once said of his own ambitions, "but they will be covered in blood if I become president." Over a period of 3 decades, Zhirinovsky created a personality cult around himself, surrounding himself with a posse of young men from the Liberal Democrats and earning a reputation as a straight-talking brawler. In another famous incident on live TV, Nizhny Novgorod Regional Governor Boris Nemtsov produced a copy of Playboy magazine and suggested Zhirinovsky had contracted syphilis through sleeping with some of the 200 conquests of which he'd boasted he'd made in an interview with the magazine. "We know your problem," Nemtsov said with a smile, pointing to the magazine. "We can cure you. We have 2 simple injections." Zhirinovsky rose to his feet with cries of "bastard" and "scumbag." Talk show host Alexander Lyubimov tried in vain to restore calm. "You're a bastard. I spit in your face," shouted Zhirinovsky, picking up a glass of orange juice and throwing the contents in Nemtsov's face. The Liberal Democrats' stance on foreign policy is a reflection of its ultranationalist ideology. It opposes NATO, often employing confrontational rhetoric against the alliance. Its leaders have openly criticized Western sanctions, positioning themselves as defenders of Russian sovereignty. This stance has resonated with many Russians who sees the West's actions as intrusive and unjustified. At the core of the party's ideology lies a strong commitment to Russian sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Liberal Democrats have been vocal in its support for the Russian government's actions in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, framing them as necessary steps to protect Russian-speaking populations. This stance, while popular among certain segments of Russian society, has led to further alienation from the West and a reinforcement of stereotypes about Russian aggression. Zhirinovsky died due to the pandemic in early 2022, shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. With the party transitioning to the current leader, Leonid Slutsky, we find a figure equally controversial and polarizing. A prominent member of the Liberal Democrats, Slutsky has been known for his staunch nationalism and support for Russian actions in Crimea and Ukraine. However, his leadership has been marred by scandal and allegations of misconduct. In 2018, Slutsky faced accusations of sexual harassment by several journalists, leading to widespread calls for his resignation. Though he denied the allegations, the incident sparked a debate on gender equality and the treatment of women in Russian politics. Slutsky's handling of the situation, coupled with the lack of meaningful consequences, exposed deeper issues within the Liberal Democrats and Russian politics at large. Critics argue that the incident revealed a culture of impunity and a failure to hold political leaders accountable. The leadership of Zhirinovsky and Slutsky exemplifies the Liberal Democrats' complex and often controversial position in Russian politics. Both leaders have managed to capture the public's attention with their bold rhetoric and unorthodox methods, but their actions and policies have often divided opinion, both domestically and internationally. The Liberal Democrats' relationship with the ruling United Russia Party is puzzling and often contradictory. While publicly criticizing the government, the Liberal Democrats have frequently supported key Kremlin initiatives, voting in favor of constitutional amendments and other major policy decisions. This duality raises questions about the true nature of the Liberal Democrats' opposition, leading many to see it as part of the controlled opposition, a party that gives the appearance of political pluralism without genuinely challenging the ruling elite. However, despite the cast of Kremlin stooges who make up the theatre of Russian politics, it would be an injustice not to mention the brave and courageous men and women who've spoken out against the corruption and authoritarianism of the Russian political system. With the official opposition largely for show, President Vladimir Putin now rules Russia virtually unchallenged. Many of the critical voices that once spoke out have been forced into exile, while other opponents have been jailed or in some cases murdered. By the time he launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, more than 2 decades of stamping out dissent had all but annihilated opposition in Russia. At the very start of President Vladimir Putin's rule, he brought to heel Russia's powerful oligarchs, immensely rich people with political ambitions. By far the most prominent opposition figure in Russia is now Alexei Navalny, who has accused Putin from jail of aiming to smear hundreds of thousands of people in his criminal and aggressive war. In August 2020, Navalny was poisoned with Novichok, a military-grade nerve agent, while on a trip to Siberia. The attack nearly killed him, and he had to be flown to Germany for treatment. His return to Russia in January 2021 briefly galvanized opposition protesters, but he was immediately arrested for fraud and contempt of court. He is now serving 9 years in prison and was the focus of an Oscar-winning documentary. In the 2010s, Navalny was actively involved in mass government protests, and the many exposés by Navalny's main political vehicle, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, have attracted millions of views online. In 2021, the foundation was outlawed as extremist, and Navalny has repeatedly dismissed allegations of corruption as politically motivated. Many of his associates have come under pressure from security services, and some have fled abroad, including the former head of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, Ivan Zhdanov, former top FBK lawyer, Lyubimov Sobol, and most of all, if not all, the heads of the extended network of Navalny's offices across Russia. Navalny's right-hand man, Leonid Volkov, left Russia when a money laundering case was launched against him in 2019. Another key Putin critic behind Russian bars is Ilya Yashin, who has been sharply critical of Russia's war. In a live stream on YouTube in April 2022, he urged an investigation into possible war crimes committed by Russian forces and called President Putin the worst butcher in this war. That livestream led to 8.5 years in jail for violating a law against spreading deliberately false information about the Russian army. The law was rushed through Parliament shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. In 2019, he spent more than a month behind bars for his active role in protests against the authorities' refusal to register independent and opposition-minded candidates for elections to the Moscow City Council. Cambridge-educated journalist and activist Vladimir Kara-Murza has twice been the victim of a mysterious poisoning that left him in a coma in 2015 and 2017. He was arrested in April 2022 following his criticism of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and charged with sharing fake news about the Russian military, organising the activities of an undesirable organisation, and high treason. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison in April 2023. He has authored numerous articles critical of Putin in prominent Russian and Western media, and 2011 led opposition efforts to secure the adoption of Western sanctions targeting human rights abusers in Russia. These sanctions, imposed by many Western countries, are known as the Magnitsky Acts, after whistleblowing lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, who died in a Russian jail in 2009 after alleging fraud by officials. Democracy has been experiencing a troubling decline globally for over 15 years, and a crucial figure in this worrying trend is Russian President Vladimir Putin. Having spent more than 2 decades consolidating power, rebuilding Russia's military, and weakening his perceived enemies, Putin's played a vital role in undermining democratic principles both in his country and abroad. A prime example of this trend is Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the most significant military conflict in Europe since World War II. This invasion represents a notable escalation of Russia's hostility towards democracy and poses a dire threat to Ukraine, a country striving to establish itself as a democratic nation. The fall of Ukraine would symbolize the violent end of one of the world's young democracies, and experts argue that maneuvers like this, along with an inadequate response from other governments, have been instrumental in the global decline of democracy. Putin's animosity towards democracy has historical roots. The collapse of the Soviet Union, which led to the birth of democracies across Eastern Europe, is seen by Putin as a great geopolitical catastrophe, and he has suggested his desire to reverse it. His grievances are less ideological and more self-interested, aimed at safeguarding his hold on power and expanding Russia's global reach. His rule's influence has been corrosive to democracy. After Georgia's move to join NATO, Russia invaded in 2008 and continued to interfere in its politics. Russia's collaboration with autocratic leaders in countries like Kazakhstan and Venezuela further demonstrates its willingness to undermine democratic systems where it sees fit. Russia has actively sought to destabilize Western democracies by interfering in elections in the US, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain and others. Yet the decline of democracy is not solely the fault of authoritarian leaders like Putin. A Freedom House report also highlights the failure of democratic leaders to take a strong stance. The world's response to Russia's annexation of Crimea, for instance, proved insufficient to deter future aggression. Recent sanctions on Russia have also fallen short of exerting maximum pressure, with Europe's economy still relying heavily on the Russian energy sector. The growth of collective economic and political power among autocratic governments has further enabled authoritarian behaviour. China's approval of Russian wheat imports following Western sanctions exemplifies this emerging solidarity amongst autocracies. Additionally, authoritarian rulers like Putin have increasingly abandoned even the pretext of democratic norms, openly jailing political opponents and suppressing opposition. These developments collectively signal a world where liberal democratic values are losing their sway. Other leaders with authoritarian aspirations are taking notice, learning from the examples set by Russia and others. In this context, Russia's theatre of democracy represents a broader test of whether the global erosion of democracy will continue unchecked. The stakes are high, and the world's response to these challenges will have profound implications for the future of democracy and the international order. As we've explored today, the chilling reality of Russia's opposition landscape is a complex and concerning issue. The relentless crackdown on dissenting voices, the jailing of prominent critics, and the severe measures taken against those who dare to challenge the regime paint a picture of a nation where freedom of expression is increasingly under threat. Now we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the treatment of opposition figures in Russia? Do you believe that international pressure can make a difference in these cases? Or has the world become too complacent in the face of such blatant disregard for human rights? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is essential in keeping this conversation alive. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to stay updated on topics like these, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. By doing so, you're joining the RedWatch TV community, where we explore pressing issues from around the world. Thank you for watching RedWatch TV, and as always, remember, knowledge is our first line of defense.